There was a rawness in David's voice that made me ache, and I hated that it did. I hated how I noticed the way his shirt hugged his arms, the tired lines under his eyes, the weight of loneliness wrapped in a man who pretended everything was fine. David grabbed my neck and moved his hands over my skin. I was lost in that beautiful moment. I was carried away by the sweetness. I was afraid, yet I loved it. David has it so huge, but he didn't go slow with me. Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, do well to subscribe and hit on notifications. To all my returning subscribers, thank you for always watching my videos. I hadn't been home in almost 3 years. Virginia felt colder than I remembered. Or maybe it was just the house. When I pulled into the driveway of my mother's suburban home, everything looked the same: white picket fence, the wreath on the door, even the welcome mat that read, "Home is where the heart is." But my heart wasn't sure it belonged here anymore. I stepped out of the car, tugging my coat tighter as the wind bit through me. Before I could knock, the door swung open. It wasn't Mom, it was him. David. My stepdad. "Emily," he said with a wide smile, his voice deep and warm. "You look like New York suits you." I managed a smile, the kind that hides too much. "Hey, David." He stepped forward and hugged me, arms strong, scent familiar, like cedarwood and fresh laundry. It was the kind of hug that lingered a second too long, but not long enough to question. "Your mother's out grabbing some wine," he said as he took my bags. "She wanted everything perfect. You know how she is during the holidays." I nodded. "Still obsessed with the details?" He chuckled. "Worse than ever." I stepped into the house and felt it wash over me. The nostalgia, the furniture that hadn't moved an inch, the soft hum of jazz playing in the background. It was the same home I had left at 23, trying to carve my own life out of concrete and subway noise. David led me upstairs to the guest room. "I added a little heater in here. I know how you hate the cold." I turned to him, surprised. "You remembered that?" He gave a crooked smile. "I remember a lot of things." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I looked away. Later that evening, Mom came back, all smiles and chaos. She cooked too much, talked too much, and drank just enough to get sentimental. "You have to stay for 2 weeks, Emily," she insisted. "You never visit." "I'll stay as long as I can," I said. David watched me from across the table. His eyes weren't intrusive, just observant. Like he was reading something between the lines I hadn't written. When Mom went to bed early, too much wine, too many memories, I found myself sitting alone in the living room with David. The tree lights blinked softly, casting colored shadows on the walls. He sat on the opposite couch, sipping whiskey. "Still can't sleep early, huh?" he asked. "New York ruined me," I said. "Everything's open all night. I got used to thinking at 2 a.m. He smiled. "Thinking's dangerous at 2 a.m. There was a long pause, the kind that isn't awkward but full of unsaid things. "You and your mom seem different," I said carefully. He shrugged, eyes fixed on the fireplace. "She's been distant. We both have. People change when they get comfortable, I guess." "Comfort can be lonely," I said, the words coming out too easily. He turned to me. "That's exactly it." I felt something shift in the air, something quiet but undeniable. Not attraction, not lust, not yet. Just recognition. Like two people realizing they were reading the same book, but from opposite sides of the room. "I'm glad you came home," he said finally. I nodded. "Me too." But I wasn't sure I believed it. Not when the house felt warmer when he was in the room. Not when my chest tightened every time he looked at me like that. Not when I started counting the seconds it took him to smile after I said something funny. It was the first night of December, and already, I was scared of what the holiday season might unwrap. It started with 1 glass of wine. Then 2. By the 3rd night, sitting across from David in the dim light of the living room, had become a ritual neither of us named. My mother would retreat to bed early, leaving us in that quiet space. Not touching, not flirting, just talking. But it wasn't casual. It never felt casual. That night, I was curled under a throw blanket, legs tucked up beneath me on the couch. The fireplace was crackling low. David handed me a glass of red wine, the good kind he kept for guests. I used to think silence was awkward, I said. But now, I think it's honest. He sat down across from me, resting his elbows on his knees. Most people talk just to fill space. But silence, that's when you really hear what someone's not saying. I looked at him, and he looked back. It was the kind of look you hold for a second too long, then pretend you didn't. What made you marry my mom? I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't flinch. She made me laugh when I'd forgotten how. After my divorce, I didn't think I had another relationship in me. But she brought life back into the room. She still makes you laugh? His eyes dropped to the glass in his hand. Not like she used to. There was a rawness in his voice that made me ache, and I hated that it did. I hated how I noticed the way his shirt hugged his arms, the tired lines under his eyes, the weight of loneliness wrapped in a man who pretended everything was fine. You always seemed strong, I said, watching him. He chuckled softly. I've mastered the art of pretending. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just sipped my wine and let the silence fill the air again. Then he asked, "Why haven't you been home in so long, Emily?" I hesitated. New York became my excuse. But if I'm honest, I didn't feel like I belonged here anymore. Why not? I looked at him. Because the house started feeling less like a home and more like a museum. Like I couldn't touch anything without breaking something. His expression changed, softer, sadder. You've always belonged. Even if no one said it. The room felt smaller. Or maybe warmer. I couldn't tell. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the moonlight draped over the backyard. I used to sit out there every weekend trying to feel something, he said. Trying to remember what it felt like to be wanted. His voice cracked on the last word just barely. I got up and stood a few feet behind him, arms wrapped around myself. That's a dangerous feeling to lose. He turned around slowly. His eyes met mine and I knew. We both knew. We hadn't touched. Not once. But something deeper was happening, something unspoken, yet louder than any kiss. He took a step forward then stopped himself. We should go to bed, he said. But the way he said it wasn't firm. It was a warning. I nodded. Yeah. I walked past him, our arms brushing. Just skin to skin, nothing more. But my body reacted like a fire had been lit beneath it. In my room I lay awake for hours listening to every sound. Every creak in the floorboards. Every whisper of wind against the window. Wondering if he was awake too. The next morning we didn't talk about it. But I knew that night had changed everything. It wasn't physical. Not yet. But it was real and somehow that made it worse. David and I started moving around each other like magnets, always just close enough to feel the pull but never close enough to crash. We cooked breakfast together while my mother worked on her endless to-do lists. We took walks around the neighborhood after dinner. We exchanged glances that lasted longer than they should have and spoke in half sentences we never finished. Every conversation felt layered. Every silence intentional. It was 2 days before Christmas when I caught him watching me from the kitchen doorway. I was sitting by the fireplace, flipping through an old family photo album. My hair was tucked behind one ear, a blanket around my legs. I looked up and smiled, half aware of how intimate the moment felt. He smiled back. Then he turned away. I didn't know what to call what was happening between us. I only knew that it was growing. That night I couldn't sleep. Again. I wandered down to the kitchen to make tea. And there he was, already there barefoot, in sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt. His hair was slightly tousled, like he'd just run a hand through it in frustration. I couldn't sleep either, I said quickly, not sure what I was interrupting. He gave a tight smile. It's becoming a pattern. We stood there, barely a few feet apart, bathed in the soft blue glow of the stove light. The world felt quiet, as if it had paused just for us. Do you think it's wrong? I asked suddenly. His eyes searched mine. What? This, whatever this is. He swallowed. I think if we're asking that question, we already know the answer. I looked down at my mug, hands trembling slightly. I'm not trying to take something that isn't mine. His voice was gentle. You're not taking anything. It's just showing me what I've been missing. The words hit me like thunder. I looked up, and for a moment I thought he was going to kiss me. He didn't. He just stood there staring like he wanted to, like he dreamed of it but didn't dare. We both stepped back at the same time. A mutual retreat. Good night, I whispered. Good night, Emily. As I walked back upstairs, I hated myself a little. Not because I had feelings for him, but because I didn't want to stop them. The days that followed were heavy with tension. My mother didn't notice. Or maybe she chose not to. She was too busy planning Christmas dinner, ordering last-minute decorations, and boasting to her friends that her daughter had finally come home. David and I kept our distance during the day. But at night our paths always found each other. One evening we sat on the back porch, wrapped in coats, watching snowflakes drift lazily to the ground. He handed me a cup of coffee and asked, "Do you ever think about what makes a relationship fall apart?" I took a sip. I think people stop looking at each other. He nodded slowly. That's exactly it. You sit across from the same person for years and one day, they're a stranger. I didn't say anything. I just watched his breath fog in the cold air, and I wished I had met him under different circumstances, in a different chapter of both our lives. He turned to me. You make me feel seen again. Those words pierced through every wall I'd built. And I said the one thing I shouldn't have. You make me feel like I matter. There was a pause. A shared ache. He looked at me like he might reach for my hand. Instead, he stood up and whispered, "We're going to hurt her." I nodded, eyes stinging. We already are. We walked inside separately, but our hearts were walking in the same direction. The kind of quiet that feels loaded, like the world is holding its breath. I stood by the window watching the snow paint everything white. It should have felt magical, but it didn't. It felt like something was about to break. Downstairs, my mother hummed to herself as she stirred gravy on the stove. David moved around the house like a ghost, present but not really there. Avoiding eye contact. Avoiding me. Last night something almost happened. We'd stood inches apart in the hallway. He reached up to tuck my hair behind my ear. It was such a small gesture. So gentle. But it changed everything. His hand lingered. I closed my eyes. And then he stepped back. Just in time. Just enough. Now we were pretending it never happened. Pretending we hadn't nearly crossed the line we'd been dancing around since the day I walked through the door. Mom set the table with her usual excitement, her laughter echoing through the dining room. "This is the first time in 3 years we're all together," she beamed. "Let's make it special." I smiled and it hurt. David poured wine and avoided my gaze. We sat, we ate, we talked. But the elephant in the room was louder than the holiday music in the background. My hands shook every time our fingers came close on the table. I couldn't breathe without feeling the weight of what we were hiding. And then it happened. David dropped his fork, bent to pick it up, and when he rose back up he looked straight at me. Not like before, not in secret. Right in front of her. That was the moment I knew. He wasn't pretending anymore. After dinner, Mom went upstairs to lie down. Too much food, too much wine. The usual. David stood in the doorway of the kitchen while I rinsed dishes. "I can't do this anymore," he said quietly. I turned around slowly. Do what? Live with it stuck in my chest like this. The wanting. The hiding. The shame. I swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" He looked pained. "I don't know. But I can't look at her face and lie anymore." There was silence between us until I whispered, "Then tell her." His eyes widened slightly. "You want me to?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "But it's the right thing." That night he went upstairs. I stayed downstairs, heart pounding, hands clenched. I couldn't hear what was said. I didn't want to. But I heard my mother's voice, broken, trembling. I heard her say my name. Then a long silence. Then crying. The kind of crying that doesn't stop after a few minutes. The next morning I came down to find my bags packed by the door. David was gone. And Mom sat at the table with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "You need to leave, Emily," she said without looking at me.
Mom, I'm sorry.
She shook her head slowly, her eyes blank.
No.
"You're not. Not really. You came here and took something that wasn't yours. You let it happen." I stood frozen. "It wasn't planned. It wasn't." "Doesn't matter," she said, cutting me off. "It happened. And now I have to live with it." I opened my mouth but no words came. I just picked up my bag, hard in pieces, and walked out into the cold. 3 months later, I still haven't spoken to either of them. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I'd stayed quiet, if we'd never shared that wine, if he'd never looked at me that way. But I also wonder something else. What happens when love grows in the wrong place, but feels more real than anything you've ever known? I don't have an answer yet. Only this story, and the ache of a choice that can never be undone. Have you ever imagined yourself in this kind of situation? What did you do about it? Subscribe to this channel and hit on notifications for more interesting stories like this.